Okay. All right, good morning all, and welcome to our Fast Start workshop on better data management. And I already see that I failed to edit my slide. This is not a Data Bytes workshop. This is a Fast Start workshop. And the Fast Start workshops are for those of you who are starting programs here at OSU. And our intention is to help you learn what resources are available, as much as anything, introduce ourselves. So I hope you've been able to take advantage of a few of these. My name is Kay Bjornan. I'll introduce myself here in just a minute, but in the meantime, I'm going to show you a little bit of it's a primer for why we're having this workshop. So it's called a Data Management Horror Story. And please unmute and let me know if there's any technical issues here, but see if I can.
Hello, my name is Dr. Judy Benign. I'm an oncologist.
Hang on. I need to do that in reverse order. Drag it.
At NYU School of Medicine.
Hello, Dr. Judy Benign.
I read your article on B-cell function. I think that I could use the data for my work on pancreatic cancer.
I am not an oncologist.
I know, but I think I could use the data for my work on pancreatic cancer. Do you have the data?
Everything you need to know is in the article.
No. What I need is the data. Will you share your data?
I am not sure that will be possible.
But your work is in PubMed Central and was funded by NIH.
That is true.
And it was published in Science, which requires that you share your data.
I did publish in Science.
Then I am requesting your data. Can I have a copy of your data?
I am not sure where my data is.
But surely you saved your data.
I did. I saved it on a USB drive.
Where is the USB drive?
It is in a box. It is in a box at home. I just moved.
But can I use your data?
There are many boxes. So many boxes. I forgot to label the boxes.
Hello again. Thank you for sending me a copy of your data on a USB drive. I received the envelope yesterday.
You are welcome, but I will need that back when you are finished. That is my only copy.
I did have a question.
What is your question? You might find the answer in my article.
No. I received the data, but when I opened it up, it was in hexadecimal.
Yes, that is right.
I cannot read hexadecimal.
You asked for my data and I gave it to you. I have done what you asked.
But is there a way to read the hexadecimal?
You will need the program that created the hexadecimal file.
Yes, I will. What is the name of the program?
Cytosynth.
I do not know this program.
It was a very good program. The company that made the program went bankrupt in 2007.
Do you have a copy of the program?
I do not use this program anymore because the company that made it went bankrupt. Maybe you can buy a copy on eBay.
I have good news.
You again.
I talked to my colleague. She knew a person with a copy of the software.
Then why do you need me? Everything you need to know about the data is in the article.
I opened the data and I could not understand it.
If you have the program, you will find it is clear.
Well, I noticed that you called your data fields SAM. Is that an abbreviation?
Yes, it is an abbreviation of my co-author's name. His name is Samuel Lee. We call him Sam.
I see. And what is the content of the field called SAM1?
Ah yes, SAM1 is the level of CXCR4 expression.
And what is the content of the field called SAM2?
That is logical if you think about it.
What is the content of the field called SAM2?
I don't remember.
What about SAM3? Is there a guide to the data anywhere?
Yes, of course. It is the article that is published in Science.
The article does not tell me what the field names mean. Is there any record of what these field names mean?
Yes. My co-author knows what the content of SAM2 is, and SAM3. And SAM4.
Can I talk to your co-author?
I'm not sure.
I would very much like to talk to your co-author.
Well, he was a graduate student. He went back to China 2 years ago.
Can I have his contact information?
He is in China. His name is Sam Lee.
I think I cannot use your data.
You could check the article to see if what you need is there.
Please stop talking now.
Okay. I still get a giggle out of that, and I've seen that dozens of times, but it's something that was published by a group of librarians at the NYU Health Sciences Center. And it has been viewed many, many, many times. So other people have also found it quite useful. And so I introduced myself. I'm the Research Data Initiatives Librarian here at OSU. And again, for those of you who may have joined late, there's a URL down there at the bottom where the slides are available, and you're welcome to download them. And just as a very quick overview, this is what we're going to go over today. We're going to talk about why you care about data management. And then we're going to talk about 6 better practices that you can implement and hopefully will make your life easier as you progress. So let's start with why. Okay, so the video is a pretty good demonstration, but even before you get to the point where you're trying to share data and share your research products, you need to recognize that your data is a resource. And in this day and age, the most important product of your research is not publications. And that is something that I think a lot of people don't recognize. Data is meant to be shared, and it will live well past a publication. Publications are a snapshot, but the data can be a living thing and can be reused and reapplied. If you do a good job of managing your data, it really improves your chances of research success, because there's nothing like lost data or poorly documented data to set you back. It's easier to analyze and communicate once you get to the point where you're trying to write things up, for whether it's for a thesis or a publication. And if you are someone who does have a very successful project, you're not going to be the last one who wants to work on it. It's going to be something that will be of interest to another graduate student or another person in your lab, and it's much easier to hand off if the data is well managed. So first, let's talk a little bit about open data and why open data matters. We are, sorry about that. We are heavily influenced by an executive order that was issued by President Obama back in May 9th of 2013. This was about, basically dictating that from that day forward, all government data, with very narrow exceptions, would be open and machine readable. In other words, that's the default. So from here forward, agencies of the US government had to plan for how to make their data so that it was available online. And the point was to make it easy to find, accessible, and usable. And this is where data.gov was implemented, kind of the first of the government repositories. And the intention was that this would help fuel the economy and promote innovation, and of course, increase scientific discovery. So this actually resulted, or then was, implemented further outside the U.S. By a project done, where the U.S. worked through the G7 to create an open data charter. And so the 5 aspects of this included the same thing that was in the executive order about open data by default, and quality and quantity. It was, intended to make sure that data that was released that, had been quality checked and that it was available in a timely fashion, usable by all. This is actually one of the prime drivers. It was intended that data, and of course, to some extent, we're not just talking about research data here. The government generates a ton of data, but it should be available to taxpayers. People that paid for it should have access to it. And that this should improve the governance and efficiency and, again, innovation. So let me draw your attention to a site, the USGS, US Geological Survey, has a particularly well organized and lots of good information on their site about data management. So even if you don't work in an area that might be funded by the USGS, I encourage you to take a look. This fundamental science practices data management section is very, very useful. And I've kind of highlighted a few things here. You can see that the USGS is highlighting the fact that they care about data because of its potential value beyond any immediate research use, and that they're intending that scientists at the USGS will make sure that all their data throughout the data life cycle, and we'll look at that in a minute, are discoverable, well described, and preserved for access and use beyond the life of the research projects. So that's you'll find that's a common theme throughout the other US funding agencies, as well as a lot of private agencies. And so the possible exception to that is Department of Defense and Department of Energy, who handle things that are classified. So not all of their data is probably public. And they have, we've also found that many private funders are also encouraging that their data be made public and the reason, or open. And the reason for that is that they recognize the importance of making sure that the money they spend is actually well spent, well beyond the short life of these projects. So what we're going to focus on today is I'm going to talk about the difference between data management planning and data management plans. So it's very likely you've heard of DMPs or data management plans. And if you have an interest or a reason to think that you're going to be creating a data management plan, I would encourage you to sign up for, there's still time for the workshop that I will be giving tomorrow at this time. And that workshop is called Drilling Down on DMPs. And we'll get into a lot more detail on that, and we'll highlight a bit the NIH data management and sharing plan, because NIH has really been in the lead on a lot of the data management and sharing, and they will be implementing a new policy that goes into effect the 1st of next year. So a lot of the information, if you have either funding or an interest in getting funding from NIH, you'll definitely want to know about this. I just dropped the link for registration for that workshop in the chat. So like I said, there's still time. Okay, we're going to talk about this a little bit. And while we discuss this, I'd like you to think about the kind of research that you do or that you administer, pay attention to, whatever. Because when we think about data, not all research creates the same type of data. Not all research has the same type of issues. So I've kind of broken it down into 4 general categories: laboratory, field studies, human studies, and computational, which can encompass any number of things. But you can kind of think about that in terms of big data. And we'll look at the specifics of the kind of challenges that those each have. Laboratory, because I'm a chemist by training, this is the one I know the best and most comfortable with. And it is something that if you are working in a laboratory, you may be generating data in a wide range of instruments or processes, methods. You may have a wide range of file types, including you'll have raw data that's off the instruments. It may produce analyzed data. A lot of it's proprietary because instruments that are sold by vendors, they don't want you to very easily manipulate that data. They want you to be dependent on their software. So that's something to consider. Then we also have, in laboratories, we're liable to have numerous different storage locations. You may have data stored on instrument computers, you may have it stored in a lab computer, and you may have it in your own personal device. And so different personnel may also use all these instruments and computers and may come in contact with it and handle that data or their own data. But as we'll discuss a little bit, that creates potential for some problems with data management. If you are a field person, then very often this data is recorded as a hard copy in a field manual or logbook, and it may be handwritten. Legibility may be a problem. It may be a problem to preserve it so it doesn't get damaged, lost. It may be collected over a very extended time and or locations, and you may be trying to synchronize that data with other data that's collected with sensors or geospatial, and this can create some problems with consistency. So making sure that that it's preserved, that it's quality controlled, and so on is an issue. Human studies, the biggest concern is always privacy and managing personally identifiable information, but you also should be concerned about a lot of that data may be unstructured. And so consistency with adequate metadata, and we'll use that term if you're not familiar with it, it's basically the descriptive information about your data, or we like to say data about data. And this too can be, a project or multiple projects that are conducted over a long period of time. And then computational, this tends to be an issue of large data sets, though not always. The biggest problems there are managing those very large data sets and having a place to store it. Being careful to be sure that you're, conserving that storage space, but still being able to document adequately so that it can be shared with collaborators. And it also may involve transferring very large files. So that's something you need to think through. So some of the things that are common, all of these different types, and it's very likely that you work with, more than one of those. You may actually work with all 4 of them, depending on your area. And this is the need to organize your data and analyze your data appropriately. You'll want to then prepare it for publication. You'll need to meet the expectations or requirements of a publisher, or more importantly, funders. And then ultimately being able to prepare that data for data sharing and archiving. And then this last item, we will not go into to speak of today, but again, it's an entire discussion all on its own. Reproducibility, replicability, and repeatability. In other words, whether you can repeat your experiment yourself, whether anybody else can repeat it, and whether it is reproducible in the bigger picture are all issues that can be greatly ameliorated by good data management. Okay, no, I kind of flashed past that. And if you have another issue that you are already aware of or think I have overlooked, I would encourage you to drop it in the chat or mention it at the end of the workshop. Always looking for input. So our first issue here, better practice one, is plan for the entire data life cycle before collecting any data. Okay, so first let's talk about what do we mean by data life cycle. This is a context that is convenient, but not necessarily entirely correct. We think of it as here's our proposal development and planning stage, okay? And this is where you need to be thinking about your data management planning. But the next phase is project startup. And here you're going to go to your preliminary experiments or making some decisions about some of the documentation and so on. This is all the entire life cycle. When I say it's not entirely representative, one of the reasons is because anybody who's ever done this kind of work knows darn well that it's all well and good to show this nice, step by step, but in fact, very likely some of these things will be going on simultaneously, and some of them you may have to backtrack and start over from. So that's, this is just a representation. Next, you have data collection and file creation. You go to data analysis, and then, the final steps for preparing your data for sharing, and then putting it in the repository. So it helps to understand that this particular form of the data life cycle is from the ICPSR website. ICPSR is a social science and political science repository. Again, an excellent resource because they have so much information about data management. And so, again, all these places are really good places to go and look for information if you need more later. Data management plans are the formal documents, and we think of them as being submitted with funding proposals, but actually it's useful when you are starting a project to think about a data management plan and creating one before you ever submit for, in other words, even if the project's unfunded, a data management plan is still extremely useful. Some of the things that will need to be included if it's being submitted for a funding proposal is everything from data types, amount, size, what type of metadata you're going to create, which subset of that data will be shared, what kind of software and code you will need to do, whether it's analysis or whatever you might need software for. You may need data standards. Depending on your discipline, there are increasingly standards for both the metadata and structure of data. You'll want to have a plan for how this data can be accessed and a way to preserve it and a timeline for sharing it. Then access, distribution, and reuse considerations, because you will probably want to license the data and tell people what it's okay to use your data for. And then any place where there may be restrictions, considerations of security and so on, you'll want to include that in your data management plan. Every agency will have a format or criteria that they expect for the data management plan. And so when you are creating one for a funding proposal, you want to dig into that. Okay, so I'm going to mention this here because and without getting into it, because again, this will be part of tomorrow's workshop, but DMP tool is a very helpful online tool for creating a data management plan. It provides guidance and templates for creating DMPs that will be submitted for most agencies, funding agencies. Never like to say all, but there's a lot. So I'd refer you to that if you are interested in looking into that. So one of the big things that researchers who are new to OSU in particular, I think, or let's just say new to a new organization, may struggle with is where to save their data during their research project. So you may also need to think about long-term. I mentioned repositories, so archiving your data when you get ready to publish. We'll talk a little bit about different types of repositories and why each kind is useful. And then a couple of secondary things that you'll want to consider as you're looking at all of this is, especially if you are a graduate student or a postdoc, and you're probably not going to be remaining at OSU, you want to think about the fact that you may want to have access to the raw data after you leave OSU. So that's something to take into consideration. You also need to be aware that OSU, by default, is the owner of all research data. There are exceptions, but as a student in particular, you need to be aware that just because you create the data does not mean that you are the owner of the data, and you will not have free access to it. So there's some hoops to go through if you plan to continue the project and need access to it later. Okay, so let's look at what is available to OS researchers. Short term, there are several options, some of them more convenient and cheaper than others. IT provides everyone with an OSU okstate.edu email, 1 terabyte of storage on a OneDrive, okay? This is most convenient for documents. It's really not terribly helpful for data, simply because it's a challenge to organize, and it doesn't have the structure that a lot of the other options will. Many departments have server space, and this is perhaps especially important if 1 terabyte frankly isn't enough for you. You'll want to investigate that. And you should reach out to your IT representative there in your department or your college, probably. And of course, there's always purchased options. I hear many people talk about, including funding in their grant proposals for servers and so on. And of course, commercial. These are obviously things that cost money. But another thing to consider with that is that there are varying degrees of privacy and security. And I saw a very interesting talk recently about the percentage of hard drives that fail and the timeline for failures and so on. So if you're going to depend on external hard drives, please consider that. Another option is Open Science Framework. I'll show you some examples of that here shortly. It is free, it is open, it is easy to interface with some other applications. For instance, storage in Dropbox, Google Drive, and so on, GitHub. So That one I like to think of as project management software, but it does have storage options. And then, of course, the web platforms. One of the things to consider about that is that beyond the privacy and security issues is you have limits on the available storage, and then they'll want you to pay them money. All right, one of your best options, frankly, is to talk to the OSU High Performance Computing Center. All OSU researchers are eligible for accounts, and students and postdocs can be also approved if faculty will sign off on it. Storage is available, but filling fast. This is the wording from Dr. Prachul Agrawal, who is the head of HPCC, but you know, they expect you to do the curation and management, but there is no charge and nothing is ever deleted by HPCC. So that's makes that a very attractive option. So there is a link down there at the bottom that I will drop in the chat as soon as I can find it here. And I would suggest if you have need of that, that you should get in touch. That is also another workshop that is being offered by as a fast start. So so yeah, if that's something that is useful to you, by all means sign up for that one. I think he does it twice. He does one this week and then another one. Whoops, that's not the right link. Okay, well, I will try and do that later, but struggling with the small screen here that I'm looking for. Okay, data repositories. So this is the long-term storage, and this is basically where you're archiving your data. Repositories are a huge topic unto themselves, okay? The objective for putting your data in a repository is that it's discoverable. You know, the metadata that you store with your data can be crawled by web crawlers, citable. It will, the repository will provide you with a persistent identifier, such as a DOI or a PID, and that means that people will be able to find it 10 years from now. Depending on the repository, there are different levels of curation and quality assurance that's provided, but that's something you should investigate as you're deciding on a repository. And the first one I'll mention is ShareOK. ShareOK is our OSU institutional repository. Actually, it's shared amongst four, I think, universities in Oklahoma, including OU. OU and OSU are the two big actors, but UCO and one other one, I think, are part of it. It is not a terribly useful place to store data. If your data is very large, you can store data there. Probably the best option is to use it as a place to upload your documents, your publications, especially preprints, and then provide a DOI to access the data with metadata in ShareOK. They are working on expanding their data capabilities, but for right now, it's somewhat limited. Okay, the next type of repository is a generalist repository. Generalist repositories are just what it sounds like. You can pretty much save, upload any type of data to it. It is non-discipline specific. They do, repositories with good reputations will perform all of the important functions of a repository, including assigning a persistent identifier, and will make the data available long-term. They'll do the checks for the data decay and so on. the better your metadata, the more discoverable it is, and it provides, security. It also provides things like the opportunity to make sure there's a license for your data and so on. So examples of this are listed. Bigshare, and I've mentioned OSF repeatedly, considered a generalist repository. Dataverse, those are probably Dryad, those are probably the best known ones. Domain-specific repositories are discipline specific, and they can be very specific. In other words, it can be such things as image data. These may provide better discoverability than generalists simply because those repositories have more traffic to them from people working in that domain. So people that have an interest in that type of data are going to be the ones that will be in there looking for your data. So there's a wider range of file types, and by that I mean, again, if you have very specialized like DNA data or genomic data or image data or something like that, it is probably not practical to try and upload that to a generalist repository, but it would be appropriate for a domain specific of that type. Okay, one thing to note, the new NIH data management and sharing policy that I mentioned earlier states a preference for domain-specific repositories when they are available. So there is another option here for in the folder where the slides are saved, and I will give you the link to that at the end of the workshop. But again, here is a link to a comparison table for domain this is for the generalist repositories, and you can find the domain-specific repositories at this link on the NIH website. So this is just kind of this is an overview. It shows you what you would find if you went in to look at the NIH list of domain-specific repositories. And so you can look through it and find, do a search with the appropriate search terms. You can see that box here, and it'll pull up probably a wide range of options, and then you would scroll through them and find the one that works for you. Okay, I mentioned ICPSR. I'm referencing here because it is I'd call it a hybrid. It is, I would call it a generalist repository, but it's very much geared towards the social sciences and the political science data and so on. So, but you can see from the bar across the top, all of the different options for materials and that you can find there. So it's a really good resource. DataOne's another one. DataOne is actually a series of linked repositories, and you can search it using their metadata. It's funded and was supported by NSF. I believe it is no longer, but it was created with the intention of supporting NSF-funded research. It's overall, the disciplines listed here, and at the time the slide was created and updated probably 6 months ago, there were 44 repositories that are all linked. So I feel good recommending the DataOne as a good place to find a repository. Okay, then we have a registry, and re3data.org is a registry of research data repositories. When I first started recommending it, it tended to be a bit heavy on repositories in Europe, but I feel like it has kind of expanded and now has a lot of US, Asian, and so on. So It's a very good place to search and find an appropriate repository. All right, now let's look at our better practice number 2. And from here, it kind of, we go a lot faster. So if you're looking at the clock and wondering how I'm going to get through this, this will speed up. But one thing that you can do yourself a lot of good is developing and using templates for data collection. The reasons are quite simple. When you encounter projects that, especially if you have multiple people collecting it, especially if you have students who need to input data for you and so on, the number of potential errors are very large. So what you can do is you set up a template that requires that the data be input in a certain order, in certain format and so on, which improves your data consistency. And you can set up spreadsheets that are won't accept data except in the correct format. Excuse me, just a second. Sorry. All right, so one good place to start is a data collection plan. This one is an example taken from Six Sigma, which may not apply to most of your research projects, but you can see the intent. It shows, this is what you're going to measure, and this is the data type. And then, there's a number of other things about who's going to collect it, the types of reporting and so on. So just a thought, something to get you thinking about it. And then templates. Okay, so I am a huge fan and encourage you to consider using a web form. Again, depending on what you're collecting data for and how, this can be an excellent way to make sure that your data gets input in the correct formats. If it's right in front of you, you're not likely to forget to take care of, entering the date, the temperature, something that's critical and could be easy to overlook. So you see here, this has predefined fields. It's got drop down. You see in the data range where it shows the format where the data needs to be entered and so on. So that helps minimize missing values and mistakes. You can use an Excel spreadsheet. There's a lot of QA, quality assurance and quality control potential in a spreadsheet. I am not a big fan of Excel, but depending on because it also has some potential problems. But something like a Google Sheet or an Excel spreadsheet, that's accessible online, can certainly prevent more problems than it causes. The other advantage to a web form that I didn't mention is it will dump into a spreadsheet or a database. And so again, you can prevent problems with transcription errors and so on. Which brings me to lab and field notebooks. And please consider minimizing the use of lab notebooks. Maybe field notebooks, you don't have a lot of options, as much as possible. They're usually used for observations, may include, drawings, diagrams, etc. But it is very easy to make errors, whether it's actual recording errors or just problems with transcription, legibility, all of that. It's recorded once and then it has to be transcribed and digitized. So it adds at least one additional step for making mistakes. So something to think about. The citation down there at the bottom is a really old, but it's a good one. And I haven't found a better one that's more current for the correct way to keep a lab notebook. One thing you can do is create a template, whether it's in an Excel spreadsheet or something and paste it into a notebook. Okay, so at least you can refer to it and remember what order you want to record your data in, the formatting, and so on. All right, so let's go to better practice number 3. It is important to determine roles and responsibilities. Now, in general, what I'm talking about here is either larger projects where you have multiple people contributing, collaborating, or even at the project level, the lab level, the group level. These are things that need to be defined, because if nobody is assigned to do it, nobody will do it. And that's a given every time. So just some examples. Who's going to do data backups? Who's going to do the reviews and quality checks? If you go to the effort to write a data management plan, it needs to be kept up to date, because what you don't want to do is, it's time for the annual report, have to go in and make a bunch of changes that reflect what you're actually doing instead of what you intended to do. Someone needs to monitor data security. Be sure that files and data transfer happens when you bring someone new in, methods, all of those things. Who's going to be responsible for, maybe you create a checklist, but there needs to be somebody who is going to take that new person under their wing and go down this list. Things like instrument calibration and maintaining all the documentation about things like serial numbers and so on. And somebody needs to be, and this one I should probably have in red because it's so important and such a common problem, is somebody needs to be responsible for deleting obsolete stuff, software, files, documentation, throwing out old paper. All of those things need to happen and will make your management of documents and data much easier. Practice for organizing and your project records, file naming, project folders, code repository, version control, and anything I might have overlooked. Okay, so I have these open, but I am checking my time and seeing I am running short. I will draw your attention to this, and if you download the slides, you can go in and take a look at this. Actually, I am going to show you one thing here because let's see if I can show you the OSF, just because I've mentioned OSF so many times. And okay. All right, so this is the template that I have marked there with the link. And this is a transparent project management template. If you do a search in OSF, you can find any number of different templates, but you can see that this one is set up with a series of folders and sites for maintaining everything from figures and data and pre-registrations and so on. Good place to start if you are interested in trying to find a starting point for a project management template. There's another example here from GitHub. If you use code and maintain a GitHub repo, again, this is a similar type thing. It's a template that shows you a way to organize your code and project. And then I want to mention version control. Again, this is something that is really important for making sure when you get ready to publish, especially hand off, whatever, frankly, even for your own use, that you make sure that you have, are using the most current version, and that if you find out there's been a hitch in that data life cycle and you have to backtrack, you don't have to recreate everything. So if you've maintained a version control for documents, methods, code, etc., this allows you to go back to it and not have to start over. This is some quick guidelines for file naming. It's important to set up a protocol for your files names and stick to it. They should be meaningful and as short as you can make them and still make them meaningful. They need to be unique. Think about how to set up dates in there and include version number and language if appropriate. The reason you avoid special characters is because if you need to upload to a software or Python, etc., it will not accept many of those. It's important to consider appropriate formatting for dates. And this is actually an ISO standard that I recommend considering because you have it organized with the largest unit year first down to the smallest, which makes it a bit easier to do searches. So depending on your needs, that might serve you very well. Okay, and so I'm just going to show you an example real quickly. This is out of a journal article where they actually taught students to consider things like how to name files. These files, which were analysis files, NMR, FTIR files from a lab, and they asked students to consider how to organize them. And what you see is on the right, the students tended to set it up the way you see here. And there it has multiple layers. Now it does use a nice, fairly systematic file naming structure. But on the other side, the instructor set it up this way with only one layer. And again, it's because it sorts things in a way that now you have the project together and you can look down the list and find the appropriate analysis that you'll want to go back in and look at later. Something to think about as an example. All right, better practice 5. This is to apply appropriate metadata as you create your data. Don't go back and do it later. And this little curve here, which is from a publication by Michener circa 1997, but it's still very true today, shows the level of detail on your y-axis versus time, and you can see disintegration, and it's the result of your memory isn't as good after time. You lose specific details, and then you have things like accidents or technology changes or failures or hard drive crashes, whatever, retirements or career change. People leave, and then it makes it very difficult to remember what was done. And eventually that data is pretty much worthless. Okay, so you want to provide descriptions of what's the content, quality, anything that's critical to the reuse of that data. And it's critical for data discovery and reuse. I mentioned FAIR here. Okay, FAIR is an acronym, which you will, if you haven't already, you will undoubtedly come across. Stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. I'm not going to go into it today, but it's the reason why metadata is so critical, because without it, these steps become impossible. One of the things that you can do very easily is use a text editor and create your data in a text file. It will be saved as a universally accessible file instead of like a Word document that you have to go hunting for proprietary software or open software for. And include, so it can be at the project level and at the file level. You want to include any of these details that are important and then save it with the data files. Wherever you save your data files, you want to save your README files. Finally, you want to plan for data protection. And the reason for that is catastrophes happen. And there are numerous examples out there. I looked up the recently looked up the Kansas State Library file where they lost in the millions of documents and records. And you never know when that's going to happen. You have floods, fires, etc. But it may not be that big a scale. It may be much smaller. I mentioned multiple people getting in and out of the same, files and so on. People accidentally delete things, hard drive crashes, malicious software, etc. Those are the kinds of things you want to plan ahead for and do the best to prevent them, the best you can. So physical barriers, in other words, if you work with critical data, locking the door behind you so that nobody has the opportunity to wander in and do something intentionally or unintentionally that's going to cause you terrible problems. Encryption, password protection. Okay, data preservation, think about file recovery. Again, you can make this much easier if you plan for it in advance. And the one thing that I repeat over and over and over again is plan for backups. There are ways to do it with software, depending on the types of data you're working with and so on. But the bare minimum you should do is have a schedule, set a schedule for a regular backup. So it might, and this should be based on how much data you can afford to lose. So if you can only afford to, if it, you generate huge quantities of data and it takes you, in a couple of days, but it takes you, 6 weeks to set that experiment up, you're losing 6 weeks of data if it's lost. So set a backup schedule, do it, weekly, daily, whatever works for you. And if you have to remind yourself, set a reminder on your calendar so that you don't forget. There are other reasons besides disasters. None of these are fun, but once in a while it's because somebody wants the data quickly. And for one reason or another, you need to be able to access it someplace, you're off campus or something. There's also the stuff like research misconduct allegations and lawsuits where you need to prove the validity of your data. And so being able to access it quickly, or from, if you've left OSU, that is, this is one way to make it easier. Okay, so I will finish with this, which is good data management is a lot like dental hygiene. If you establish good habits, you'll prevent a lot of painful and expensive reconstruction. And with that, I will stop and say good luck. This is a useful email for any kind of generic questions, and the slides will be available at this URL when the recording is uploaded. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and open it up for any questions or comments. Anybody have anything they would like to ask or share? Again, I'm interested in your own experiences. I'm also going to stop recording. So.